Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here today. I first met David Swanson in October 2005 when we were speaking on separate panels. And David is like a fine wine. He is getting, he's with time. It's just, to me, becoming more inspiring, which is he was pretty darn inspiring in the beginning. So it's a privilege to share the podium with him. I woke up, and when I saw the headlines this morning, it's been a rough morning. So thank you, all of you, for being here, because people do care. Even on a beautiful day, the first day of spring, Obama marks the first day of spring one way, and we're all here doing it another way. So thanks to all of you and David for that inspiring presentation. All right, I'm ready to pick up and keep moving forward. And I'm looking forward to hearing Dave Lindorf speak as well. So I'll make my presentation quick. To flow from what David was saying about international law and UN resolutions, the United Nations was created after World War II so that it would be a governing body that would try to ensure that what happened in World War II would happen never again. But as it stands today, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations are involved in the manufacture and sale of 85% of the weapons today. So there's a little bit of a conflict of interest when there's so much money to be made off of war, and they're the ones who are supposed to stop it. The UN, although as a governing body, I'm disillusioned with, but it's organizations that are doing research and collecting numbers, have valid studies. UNICEF has established that in modern warfare, every war fought since World War II, 90%, that's 90% of the casualties of war are unarmed civilians. These are men, women, and children. So you cannot make an argument to me that that is somehow a good thing. They've also established that more children die in warfare today than soldiers. Now, there can be an argument made about child soldiers, which does not apply, in my opinion, to American soldiers, but that is an atrocity in and of itself. So, to echo David's sentiment that war is a lie and war can be over, I'm going to focus on Iraq today, but for the information I'll be sharing with you is really, it's about what happened with the environment in Iraq. And of course, we're all sitting on the same planet. And I'm pretty sure pretty soon Mother Nature is going to give us an eviction notice because we have failed to respect our housing on her earth. But so everything that I'm presenting today we can keep in our minds as we are bombarding Libya, bombarding Afghanistan, bombarding Pakistan, and continuing to bomb Iraq. Well, this is my website, liberatethis.com. The important section for that is further reading, where I have articles that back up what I say today. But if you have any questions, comments, love mail, hate mail, whatever you got for me, please, you can reach me at info@liberatethis.com. And also I'm showing a few personal family photos, so I'm very protective of those, so just please don't take any images of them. However, as always, I encourage you to take pictures of me. Thank you very much.
That's okay.
So when we're talking about the numbers, it's very easy. Pretty much the only reason I think that has allowed me to keep my humanity and all that's happened is that I have a personal connection to Iraq. Right here, this is my father. This is the part of the graduating class of Basra Secondary School in the 1950s. You see in the background the beautiful date palm trees that Basra and Iraq have been well known for decades. So this was the 1950s, graduating from high school. My dad went on to graduate from Baghdad University College of Sciences in 1961. He did well enough there to earn a government scholarship to do his master's and PhD overseas. So he ended up coming to the United States and studying at Georgetown University. where he met a nice Jewish girl from New York, my mom. And they got married in 1968, had my sister in 1969, and then I came along in 1971. And just to note, I'm not responsible for hair or wardrobe in this photo. And I apologize, because if you heard me speak before, I got no new jokes. But anyway, this is an Iraqi family, my dad, my sister, and me. And this is an American family, my dad, my sister, and me. I was born in New York in 71. My sister was born in DC in 69. And my dad became a naturalized citizen in the 1980s. So I have family in both places. My government has trained me to think that it's us and them. So I fight hard against it every day. And my goal is to try to get more American audiences to see us all as one family as well. So I am going to show a few graphic photos because it's the truth. War is disgusting, and the Iraqi people and all the civilians who are victims around the world, they don't get an edited version. The children don't get an edited version, and American soldiers on the ground don't get an edited version, which is why today more soldiers and Marines are coming home and killing themselves than dying overseas. And this is actually, I only learned this recently, it's the same situation in the Vietnam era. So when we consider the number that we know of 58,000, which is probably an underestimate, it was the number of suicides was higher than that as well. Initially, just environmental destruction. It's a little difficult to see. It's a little faded, but this is my finger. This is a giant American cockroach, which my cousins informed me arrived with us with the shock and awe invasion to Iraq. Never saw them before. Now, over time, for years to come, whenever you introduce something into an ecosystem, there are ramifications to that. So time will tell what the impact here is, but when you introduce a new species, you alter the ecosystem. So this is an aspect of what will likely be destruction in years to come. What I'm going to present are 9 major forms of environmental damage from shock and awe military operations, which are continuing through today. And I can send you these slides, any of the information or my references, I'm happy to share with you. These are not, I'm telling about 9 of them today. This is not the end of the story. It's just a brief glimpse into thus far what we've done. And these are were compiled by Dr. Suad Al-Azawi, who was actually trained at the School of Mines in Golden, Colorado. But she, like my dad, earned her bachelor's in Iraq. She's born and raised in Iraq, an environmental engineer. And today she is one of the more than 5.5 million Iraqi refugees, half of them displaced within Iraq, half of them displaced outside of Iraq because of our destruction and the dangers and violence of our continued occupation. So number 1, simply just the explosions of conventional bombs and weapons, and very impressive photos on Yahoo News this morning for what we were doing in Libya. These explosions release nitrogen, sulfur, and carbon oxides into the atmosphere. And then what happens with further oxidation is you end up with more carbon dioxide. So this is contributing to climate change. The burning of crude petroleum with the shock and awe invasion, thousands of barrels of oil from bombed oil wells and pits around Baghdad and other cities were set on fire, and that resulted in 2 major sources of impact. The black soot plumes, which covered Baghdad and other cities for weeks during and after the invasion, and also the release of toxic and carcinogenic compounds, aromatic hydrocarbons and dioxins, all of these toxic to all living things. The third form of environmental damage, our use of incendiary weapons. Our government has told us, well, no, we don't use, we did use napalm before, but we don't use napalm anymore. And through the legal loophole, they get to say that because they've slightly altered the chemical structure of napalm. So we've renamed it MK77, but basically it does the same thing that napalm does, and I'm not sure it matters to our victims who have napalm burning them what we term it, what the actual name of it is. It's the same thing, it's a firebomb. We've used and continue to use white phosphorus, and from these incendiary weapons, there is the release of thermal heat, also contributing to climate change, as well as significant pollution. That aside, there is the impact of what happens when white phosphorus lands on a human being. And I don't have images from Iraq where it was documented, its use was documented in the city of Fallujah. But we helped to arm the Israelis with their assault on Gaza, well, numerous assaults over the years, but specifically the assault on Gaza in Operation Cast Lead, and this is what white phosphorus does. Once it's on your skin, you cannot put it out with water, you cannot stop the burning. I believe oxygen has to be deprived, so basically it only stops burning when the phosphorus reaches the bone. Significant physical damage, significant pain, and this is a chemical weapon. This is what we were supposed to be protecting the Iraqis from Saddam using against them, but this is what we are responsible for in Iraq and occupied Palestine, and I'm willing to bet other places around the world. Noise pollution from shock and awe, category number 4. This was an attack on the civilian population of the major Iraqi cities. So I remember on, I remember on March 19th, it was March 20th in Iraq. They're 8 hours ahead of us, but it was March 19th here. And we watched Baghdad get lit up on the evening news. But what we couldn't tell from that footage was the noise impact on the ground. The noise intensity of the bombing campaign exceeded 130 decibels. And for humans, the threshold of pain is between 115 and 140 decibels. So if you consider, not that I'm saying the adults deserved it either, but if you consider that 50% of Iraq's population are under 18, this is a tremendously traumatizing effect on a population, especially children, who don't understand why this is happening. And as you can see, we do make effective destructive bombs. This was the Baath Party headquarters in 2004. It had been bombed during the shock and awe invasion in 2003. This is my picture from when I visited them. You can see the significant destruction that one of our bombs can accomplish, but what we can't see in this picture is the noise. And having been there when a few smaller missiles were fired in my uncle's neighborhood on the last night I was there in 2006, that in and of itself is, it didn't cause pain, but it did cause terror. But certainly the impact of this we don't know how much it hurts your ears, as we ask the people there. And just to note, the only construction that's gone on in Iraq since the invasion and occupation has been on the Green Zone and building the world's largest embassy, which gives us the feeling that we have diplomatic relations there. It's not quite the case. We have diplomatic relations with the government we've installed there. But there's been construction there. There's been construction on Iraqi military bases, which have now been converted to American military bases. And there's been construction of walls that have basically divided Baghdad into ghettos that have been accomplished by ethnic cleansing, purely Sunni or purely Shia ghettos or purely Christian areas, which was never before seen in Iraq. And the one good thing about those separating walls is that they were set up by the United States Army Corps of Engineers, and we know the quality of their work from the levees in New Orleans. So it shouldn't take too much to bring down those walls. And actually, in the days of revolution after Tunisia and Egypt and Yemen and Bahrain and Libya, when the revolution started rolling on, there were major demonstrations in Iraq. A lot of people were killed, but also there were people pulling down those separation walls. This is not something Iraqis want; it's what we want. So that's what construction is going on in Iraq. As far as the Baath Party building in Basra, this is what it was in 2006, 2 years after 2004. So not a lot of rebuilding there, and to my knowledge, it's even smaller today. Number 5, an increase of total suspended solids in the air, which environmental engineers abbreviate as TSP. This is because of invading forces, heavy artillery's traffic. Having been in my uncle's neighborhood when the British tanks, because at that time the British were still there, as they were rolling up and down the streets, everything was shaking. And also, in addition to that, there's the deep earth bombardment using bunker buster bombs and other earth penetrating missiles. Now, I'm not a geologist. I can't say for sure that there's a direct correlation, and Japan is not exactly right next door to Iraq. But I'm pretty sure that deep penetrating, earth penetrating missiles is not helping the stability of tectonic plates on Mother Earth. Also, what happens with these solids, with the increase of solids in the air, is it has caused an increased incidence of dust storms. And this was shown after the first Gulf War, the bombardment that took place in the 6 weeks of the first Gulf War, and then an increased incidence of dust storms. Now, when I think dust storms, I think, ooh, a windy day, I see dust moving in the street. But no, in Iraq, this is what a dust storm is. There's no getting away from that. And what I also learned yesterday at a panel I attended at the Left Forum in New York was that this is also contributing to climate change, because this increase of total suspended solids in the air, again, is releasing the elements, including carbon, which then gets oxidized to carbon dioxide, which then increases, that's the increase of greenhouse gases. So this is also, it's not just destroying things in Iraq. Globally, this is having a global impact. Number 6, electromagnetic pollution. I'll jump down here. We have seen in the areas where the early radar systems were tested and established that for the civilians in the nearby area, there were higher rates of cardiovascular diseases and cancers that were diagnosed there. Well, that leads to an increase in morbidity for the population, where we have introduced a great deal of electromagnetic pollution. We use laser-guided missiles, radars, and advanced electronic devices. What that causes is ionization of the atmosphere, which then generates free oxygen radicals, which then lead to this increased incidence of disease. It's more concentrated where all of our electronic equipment is concentrated, but again, we're all living on the same planet. It's going to get to us eventually. Number 7, surface and groundwater pollution from fuel and toxic chemical spills. This is through not only our bombing campaigns, but also our failure to prevent looting afterwards. U.S. soldiers followed orders to protect the Ministry of Oil in Baghdad, that building that held the directions for all of Iraq's oil economy. We protected the Ministry of the Interior, which was basically their CIA. We are now operating their CIA. And we protected the oil fields. Everything else was left open to looting, including chemical plants, not WMDs, just traditional chemical plants, looting of the Iraqi military bases, and also the nuclear power facilities. Sewage accumulation, reservoir contamination. Since 1991, cholera has been endemic in Iraq. This was a country that was at first world status in terms of healthcare, infant mortality rates, the survival for children under 5. That's been devastated. Typhoid and malaria have also become prevalent. And then all these toxins released into the air then become like acid rain. You have polluted rainstorms. Number 8, land and soil degradation, again from bombings, heavy artillery traffic, sewage flooding, garbage accumulation. This has been in the huge areas of Baghdad and other Iraqi cities. So again, with the bombardment that continues today in Libya, we are now sharing all of this with the Libyan people. And this little one is happy to point out the problems in the street. This would be a main road. And as soon as I crossed the border in 2006 from Iraq to Kuwait, the roads changed from this to a beautifully paved road that you would see in any Western society. It was such a stark contrast in have and have not. And this little one is, well, not little, but This young man is washing his face with the water here. This is some sort of spent shell. This is the destruction of Iraq's water systems that continues to this day. So finally, I'm going to end on depleted uranium, which is perhaps will have the longest effect of any of these sources of environmental destruction. Basically, ionized radiation from our weapons that has been dropped in highly populated areas, including Baghdad, Samawa, Basra, Fallujah, and other cities. So basically what depleted uranium is what is left over when any country, the US, Canada, anywhere around the world, once uranium is mined, only 0.7% of what is mined is the correct isotope for the use for nuclear power. The other 99.3% of the uranium that's mined is a different isotope that has no use for nuclear power and actually had no use whatsoever, and tons of it remains stored throughout the country today. But the value of this uranium, which is also called DU, is that it's the most dense material on Earth. The only thing that comes close is the element tungsten, which is located, there are some deposits of it in Russia, but there's obviously tremendous expense in mining it. But we've got tons of this very dense material, DU, stockpiled all over the country, and the government has to pay to maintain these storage silos intact. So what the Pentagon found is that if you form the DU into armor-piercing rounds and you aim it at a tank, it will cut through a tank like a hot knife through butter, which is very exciting if you're the Pentagon. But there is residual impact from the use of this uranium. That on impact with its target, the uranium bursts into flames and it aerosolizes into microscopic particles, into tiny, just a few microns in diameter, and these particles go into the air and into the sand and into the water supply. So anyone who's there is breathing it in, and the people who are living and dependent on the water supply are drinking it in. So this is now tons of microscopic contamination. We used it for the first time during the first Gulf War, where we dropped we aerosolized over 300 tons of DU, concentrated primarily in southern Iraq. We used it again in the NATO bombing of Kosovo in 1999. We used it again in Afghanistan from 2001 through today. And since 1991, through the establishment of the no-fly zones where we were bombing southern Iraq, through shock and awe, through today, we are using depleted uranium and aerosolizing it over Iraq. To date, more than 2,000 tons have been aerosolized over Iraq. And this is all radioactive, and as I described, we can breathe it in or drink it in. Major Doug Rockey was the Pentagon's #1 guy for geophysics, really a brilliant man. And they sent him, after the first Gulf War, they sent him to Iraq and said, hey Doug, can you just go check out what we did? Just tell us if there's any after effects. And actually, Doug Rockey is sick himself, and he's lost many members of his study team who have died from cancers, most likely connected to their exposure to the uranium. But what his report to the Pentagon was that, first of all, you never should have used it in the first place. It's illegal because it has an impact long after the war is over. Number 2, don't ever use it again. Number 3, you have to inform the civilian population of what you've just done to them, where the concentrations of highest exposure are, what has been bombed most significantly, and educate them, let them know so they can protect themselves. And number 4, you have to test every returning soldier for exposure. Because if they have a problem from being exposed to radiation, this is a service-related issue, and they get benefits and disability accordingly. Well, the blood test for DU exposure, which has to be done within 30 days of redeployment back home, costs about $1,000 a test. This is not an expense that was deemed worthwhile for the Pentagon. So they said, Doug, thank you very much, you're fired. He continues this day, in spite of his health problems, to scream at the top of his lungs of what this impact is, that this is basically a nuclear war that we have been conducting in that area of the world for now over 20 years. It impacts soldiers. It is the most likely etiology of Gulf War syndrome. It impacts soldiers' children. There was a life photo essay in 1994, either 93 or 94, called The Tiny Victims of Desert Storm, which followed several families that showed that there was a significant increase in the incidence of birth defects of the children of Desert Storm veterans who had had normal children prior to their service. Congenital defects like spina bifida, children born with no arms, no legs. This little one has something called Golden Hearse syndrome, which is a very rare syndrome. It's a genetic defect that has a number of symptoms. But what's interesting about this syndrome, I don't mean interesting, you'll see how I mean it. What is of importance of this syndrome is that there were a cluster of cases among the children of Gulf War veterans. But without a correlation, there was no funding to do the epidemiology to see if there was a connection to their fathers, because it was mostly fathers' service. There's no funding for them. There's no benefits to care for them. So the status of these children who are coming into adulthood today, I don't have that information. So it affects kids on this side, on this side of the ocean. And it affects children overseas. In Iraq, after the first Gulf War, there was a 600% increase in Iraq's infant mortality rate and 300% increase in the incidence of pediatric leukemias and lymphomas. Most likely cause is this radiating depleted uranium. So why are kids affected so much? Because they're growing. Their cells are dividing. And we know that you introduce radiation into that, and that screws up the whole pattern. This little one was getting, obviously has an IV in his foot, so he's getting, you can see some hair loss, he's getting chemotherapy. But what also happened during the sanctions period was that the American and British governments argued that chemotherapeutic agents could be dual-use items, that the Iraqi government might use them as chemical weapons. So we blocked them from entering Iraq. So although this child is getting at least one round of chemotherapy for his cancer, most of these cancers, especially in kids, are treatable. Depending on the form, it can be up to 90% treatable. But without the medication, without the chemotherapeutic regimen, it's 100% fatality, and that's what the oncologists were dealing with in Basra. And with the chaos and lack of security and lack of access to medications today, this is a crisis that continues. But of greatest interest, this is my cousin, who I obviously worry about all of them as the new generation arrives. I've been exceedingly lucky thus far. My five cousins who've been born since 2003 have been born healthy, and I consider myself extremely lucky. And they're in Basra, which was heavily hit during the first Gulf War. But what we are now seeing is the devastation in Fallujah, where with between the two sieges, April and November of 2004, there's now tremendous environmental contamination, so much so that they're able to find a pattern. This is an article that appeared in The Independent in July of last year. The toxic legacy of the U.S. assault on Fallujah, worse than Hiroshima, in terms of infant mortality, cancer, and leukemia rates. After Hiroshima, there was found to be a 17-fold increase in leukemias occurring in Hiroshima following our use of the atomic bomb. In Fallujah today, 38-fold. And that's why they say the legacy is worse than Hiroshima. Also, the types of cancers seen in Fallujah today are similar to that in the Hiroshima survivors who were exposed to ionizing radiation from the bomb and uranium in the fallout. This is our legacy in Iraq. Today, 1 in 3 children is born with a birth defect. This is unprecedented.
In Iraq or just Fallujah?
In Iraq. So in Fallujah. So specifically, and so studies need to be done to establish a correlation. and the funding and the security to conduct those studies is pending today. This little one, it's hard to guess from the image what the defect is here, but this is the next generation in Fallujah today. And this is the next generation. This is all 3 children in this family are affected by a genetic defect. These are not our enemies. They are our victims. So, as I have been since 2004, I advocate for the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of soldiers, Marines, and mercenaries from Iraq, Afghanistan, and anywhere else we choose to send them. Everybody's got an agenda. I'm no different. This one is mine because I want liberty and justice for all. Based on what I heard yesterday on climate change, this is the sleeping giant that is going to catch up with us, but we keep working and keep hope alive for them. This is my nephew who lives in Pennsylvania, born and raised there. These are my cousins in Iraq, born and raised there. And in my naive mind, my narrow vision mind, there should be no difference between the futures of these little ones simply because of where they were born on planet Earth. So it's my goal to make sure that my government doesn't raise this little one to go take an M16 to kill them if their agenda for their population when they're adults is contrary to our ownership of their oil. So in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in the early days of the Libyan revolution, they don't want foreign intervention. They say the Libyan people can manage it alone. So I like to show this slide to let people know that the voices are out there. The message is the same. You can paraphrase it a little bit any way you want to, but still we carry on, we move forward, and we can tell them exactly what we think of their war. Thank you all so very much for your attention.